Good morning, I'm Amber, and I've been teaching in this academy for more than a year now. I've been in the teaching industry for 10 years. With my hard-earned experience, I learned manifold things that helped me climb the ladder to success. Nevertheless, I firmly believe that the achievements that I have attained are not yet sufficient. As we all know, change is the only constant thing in this world, which is the most essential agent that I always consider to be able to help students to achieve their goals. The bliss of being part of someone's success is something that can't be bought by money or any treasure in this world. For this reason, I fell in love with teaching. In order to always be in excellence, here are my secrets. In this presentation, I would be sharing with you how I teach my students, classroom management, and my attitude towards teaching. Okay, so first off, let's have the TLET or new lessons. So basically, I consider this one as the precious stage of our success. I think the saying that goes first impression lasts applies to this stage. It is because it is the time for me to encourage students to impress them and to book classes to book classes for the coming days. Okay, so I actually take this opportunity, this vital opportunity to know my students. When I try to know my students, I actually know their level using BSR. So I actually made myself be familiarized with the BSR so that I would be able to give nearly accurate scores to my students. At the same time, I try to determine their strengths and weaknesses. And of course, after that one, I would be giving them solutions, a partial solution only to their problem. But then the most important thing in this stage is that my students and I always make a vision. It's my foundational guide so as to help my students to achieve their goals in a certain time. As you know, students in this academy have limited time to attain their success. So this can easily direct us to achieve their goals. But then if if the student is basic. I mean, he doesn't have knowledge about IELTS. What I do is I also give him basic knowledge about IELTS speaking. Okay, so after gaining important information about my students, I create a lesson plan for him. So I make it a point that this one should be unique because it's based on students' need and level. As we all know, these ones are not always the same for all students. Okay, so when it comes to normal lessons, these are the things that I normally do or usually do. I teach the skill first, and then after that, check and give feedback, give sample answer, and I also do mock test. So let's take a look at these ones in detail. When it comes to the the skill, letting them know the skill that they need, what happens is that I tell them the method first on how to answer the question. Of course, this method would actually differ from the stage or the parts of the exam. I teach them the skills or the methods, the strategies that they need to answer, how to answer part one, part two, and part three. But then I take it one at a time. So after teaching them one skill, what happens is that we practice by giving him a question and letting him answer first. So after answering the question, I give him feedback. And then I let him also, or I assist in improving his answer. And then we repeat the process until he masters the skill. Okay, but sometimes I have students who actually have difficulty understanding the skill or difficulty mastering the skill what I do is I make it a point first that he be able to understand the strategy or the skill that he needs in order to answer a specific type of question. And so if we are not able to master that one in the class, then we try that again on our next class. So after that one, um, we also try to focus more on his weak points. Basically, what I mean to say is that whenever I teach the skill to students, these skills are actually based on their weak points. So it can be like organization, vocabulary, grammar, or pronunciation. But most of my students at the beginning, we focus more on organization. And as time passes, we try to cover grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. Okay, so when it comes to the second part, checking and giving feedback, what I do is while listening to the answer of the student, I take down notes. And then after that one, I point out his mistakes one by one. So when I try to point out his mistakes, I also explain why he committed that error and try to give him alternative solutions, offer him solutions in order to be able to help him not to repeat this question again. I actually assist him in improving his answer. Okay, so again, when I try to check and give feedback, what I do is I always consider the level and the target of the student. Okay, so there. And the next stage is giving sample answer. Well, this one actually depends on the level and of course the target score of the student. So when the student would aim for 7.0, and so I would be giving him or her complex sentence structures, less common expressions including idioms. But then whenever I give sample answers to them, I use their ideas as well so that they would be able to understand more and have a deeper insight on how they would be delivering their answer. And of course, I do mock tests or I give them mock tests. It is suggested by this company to give them like every 10 days or every after 10 days, like these ones. But I don't only do this one, but also I try to give them mock tests few days before their test. So this is actually very crucial or very important so that they would be able to ease their nervousness and at the same time they would have an awareness of their weaknesses which would let them not to repeat those mistakes in the IELTS exam. Most of all, I believe that this mock test would actually help them to boost their confidence. So I actually give this one a few days before their real exam. Okay, so there are important things that I would like to share with you. First off, when it comes to giving homework to students, I always give them instructions so that they would not be writing the whole answer and that they wouldn't be memorizing their ideas because what happens is that if they try to memorize their ideas, they try to memorize their answer, it wouldn't sound natural. Okay, so and so that would be like marked down on their part. So what I do is I try to give a question, for example, part two. Okay, this part two question should be like would be like how can I say this one? Would be the same pattern as what we have learned in our lecture or in our class. So, for example, answering questions about people, describing people. So his homework would also be about describing people. So the strategy or the tips or the method that I gave him in class, he would be able to apply it during his self-study time. And so without me, he would be able to learn how to answer that question. But then what I always tell them is just to write the keywords and not to write the whole answer. They can also search words and expressions that they can use on their internet, on the internet, or on their dictionary. And of course, I always remind them to memorize these expressions. Okay, so when it comes to checking their homework, what happens is that I don't let them submit their answer, the written ideas to me. What I do is I ask them to tell their ideas to me, and at the same time I check the time. So I see to it that they would be able to speak for more than a minute and less than 2 minutes. The requirement is 1 to 2 minutes, right? So that's it. And then, of course, we go back to the process again. I take down notes, and then after that, I give my feedback. And then after that, I try to assist them in answering or improving their answer. And then after that, I'll try to give some suggestions to them on how they would be able to attain their score by giving them sample answer again. There. So, but it still depends on the level and the target score of the student. It always depends on that. Okay, there are also students who wouldn't like to let them repeat the answer. Okay, so they would just take the feedback from me, and then after that they would say, I would do this one again on my self-study time, and then I'll answer this question on our next meeting. That's also okay. So in this case, balance is also important. Like, I always observe who speaks more. So basically, in this case, I always make it a point that the student should be speaking more than I, because this is his class. It's not a listening class, it's a speaking class. So there should be balance. But then when it comes to new classes, especially on trial lessons, like those things, for the first half, he should be speaking more. So my role is to just ask questions. And then for the second half, I would be explaining to him. But then as I explain, as I check his mistakes, I let him speak by letting him improve his answers, like that. Okay, so most of the time the student should be speaking. Another thing is I try to adjust the speed of my talk. So it actually depends on the level of the student and how and the understanding of the student as well. So of course for advanced students I try to speak fast, and then for beginners slow. So what happens is that for beginners, after few weeks, okay, if he already have adjusted, what I do is I try to increase the speed of my talk until he become accustomed to it, because as we all know, in real IELTS exam, the examiner doesn't stoop down on the level of the student. They would try to speak at a normal speed. So in this case, for beginners, I try to train them also until they'd be able to understand the normal speed in conversation. And the last thing here is I always try to be flexible. By this I mean I always adapt to the strategy that would be suitable to the learning style of my students. Of course, um, it's a well-known fact that there are students who would really try to give or tell the strategy that they would like to have in their class to their teacher. Of course, in my case, I try to follow. So if the student would find out eventually that his strategy is wrong, then that's the time I can tell him my strategy. Okay, so eventually he follows. But then there are also students who are who really know themselves. So in this case, the strategy that they told me are actually effective for them, so they were able to improve more, and thus they were able to attain the goal that they need. Okay, so that's for the important notes. Now let's move on to the classroom management. So basically, classroom management for me is something like a professional commitment. So I always spice try to spice up the life of my students. So this is actually an acronym. I just made it. So S stands for student centered. So it means that I always focus on my student. I try not to browse sites that are not related to our class. Okay. So another thing is, if there is a student or there are students who are sending message to me, would like to ask question, would like to book classes, I already made a message, like a pre-made message in QQ, telling them that I'm sorry, I'm still busy now, but I would be able to get back to you later, like that, something like that. Okay, so. Another thing is punctual. I try to be punctual in my class. In this case, I try not to be late, and I always finish on time. So I stands for interactive. I actually make it a point to make my class be interactive. It's not like I would always be the one talking. As I mentioned earlier, it's not a listening class, it's a speaking class, and it's the class of the student. So I always encourage the student to talk, to voice out his ideas, to voice out his opinions. Of course, it should be related to IELTS, okay? And then when it comes to letter C stands for captivating, and most of all E is for exceptional. So basically in this case, I always try my best in order to help students achieve their scores. So every time I have class with them, I try to make it a point that they learn something from me. Okay, and so I strive for excellence. That's it. So when it comes to the last part of my talk, which is attitude, basically in this case, this should not be neglected. So I actually put this in my priority list, for it's by having a professional relationship to students that makes me successful. Basically, I always put myself in their shoes, by which I mean I imagine myself learning their mother tongue. Through this, I don't only look at the tip of the iceberg, but I dig deeper to what their real weaknesses and problems are, enabling me to target what they need in a subtle manner, like that. It is not hurting their ego. Okay, so then let's just say patience, passion, and these ones are really important for us to improve, or for me to improve his conversational skills, which encompass fluency, coherence, vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation, especially their intonation. So in this case, when these ones are actually felt by the student, eventually they'd be able to recommend, or they recommend me willingly to their friends or to their relatives. Okay, so those things. All in all, actually, it boils down to one thing. Okay, so that is loving my work. I love my job. I love my work so much. So with this one, whenever I actually look back on those achievements that I had, this is because of my love to my work. I wouldn't be able to achieve success. I wouldn't be able to help my students. I wouldn't be able to produce course for them without this. Okay, so hopefully I've been you've learned something from me from my experience and that's it for today. Have a good day. Bye for now.